"Take a seat, Karoline," the reporter said, his tone sharp yet deceptively polite. The bright lights of the studio cast long shadows, giving the room a cold, almost clinical feel. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made even the camera crew exchange nervous glances. Karoline Leavitt walked onto the stage, calm and composed. She was no stranger to the tricks of the media, especially when it came to twisting words and framing narratives. Dressed in a sharp yet simple outfit, she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her eyes scanned the audience, some supporters, some skeptics, and of course, the reporter sitting across from her, waiting like a predator eyeing its prey. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, every movement. Millions were watching from their homes, waiting for the inevitable clash. The network had advertised this as a must-watch interview, promising a heated exchange. The reporter, a well-known critic of Trump and his supporters, had made it clear, tonight, he planned to put Karoline in a corner. "Let's get straight to the point," the reporter began, leaning forward. "You've been one of Trump's most vocal defenders. Given the latest allegations against him, do you still stand by your support?" It was a trap, an opening strike designed to put her on the defensive. A lesser guest might have stumbled, might have scrambled to find the right words. But Karoline? She simply smiled, unfazed. "You say allegations like they're facts," she said smoothly. "Shouldn't we be discussing evidence instead of media speculation?" The reporter's jaw tightened, but he masked it well. "So you're saying these claims aren't credible?" Karoline tilted her head slightly. "I'm saying the media has a history of pushing narratives that later turn out to be false. You remember the Russia hoax, don't you? Or the very fine people lie?" A murmur ran through the audience. The tension in the room thickened. The reporter hadn't expected her to go on the offensive so quickly. "This isn't about the past, Karoline," he shot back. "We're talking about now." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "Oh, but it is about the past. Because when the media gets caught lying, they just move on, hoping people forget. Well, I don't forget, and neither do the American people." The audience shifted, sensing the energy in the room change. The reporter glanced at the teleprompter, silently recalibrating. He needed to regain control. "Fine," he said, sitting back. "Then let's talk about your own record. Many people believe your views on Trump are extreme. That you defend him no matter what. Are you saying he's never done anything wrong?" Karoline sighed, as if she were disappointed by the weak line of attack. "I believe in fairness," she said, her voice steady. "And I believe in holding everyone accountable, including Trump. But what I won't do is let the media create scandals where there are none. You ask if I support Trump. My question to you is, do you support the truth?" The silence in the studio was deafening. The reporter shifted, but before he could respond, Karoline continued. "Because if you do," she said, leaning forward slightly, "then you'll admit that much of what's said about Trump is taken out of context, exaggerated, or outright false. And you know it." The reporter's lips pressed into a thin line. He wasn't used to guests turning the questions back on him. He glanced at the producer, who gave a subtle signal, "Keep pushing." "So, just to be clear," he said, forcing a smile, "you believe the media is lying?" Karoline didn't even hesitate. "I believe the media picks and chooses the truth to fit their agenda. And tonight so are you." A stunned silence followed. Even the audience members who had come expecting her to fail were now watching with newfound curiosity. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a battle of narratives, a test of who would control the story. The reporter inhaled deeply, clearly realizing this wouldn't be as easy as he thought. And the real fight had only just begun. The air inside the studio felt heavier, charged with an invisible tension that made even the crew hesitant to move. The lights overhead burned bright, cameras rolling, broadcasting this moment to millions. The reporter adjusted his tie, his smile forced but determined. He had underestimated Karoline's composure in the first round, but now he was ready. He leaned forward, eyes locking onto hers like a predator assessing its prey. "Let's talk about facts," he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "You say the media twists the truth, but let's look at Trump's record. Are you saying he's never misled the public, never made a mistake?" A classic trap, one designed to force Karoline into either blind loyalty or contradiction. If she admitted Trump had made mistakes, he could twist it into an attack. If she denied it, he would paint her as delusional, a no-win scenario. But Karoline saw it coming from a mile away. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Of course, he's made mistakes. He's human. But unlike the media, he doesn't pretend to be something he's not. The audience murmured, sensing the shift. The reporter's eyebrows twitched slightly. This wasn't the answer he wanted. "So, you admit it," he pushed, trying to regain control. "Then why do you defend him so fiercely?" Karoline let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you? People don't support Trump because they think he's perfect. They support him because he fights for them. Because he doesn't back down when the media tries to control the narrative. That's why you hate him, isn't it?" The reporter's expression darkened, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. Hate is a strong word. Karoline's eyes didn't waver. Not strong enough for the way the media treats him. The tension in the room deepened. The audience wasn't just watching a debate anymore. They were witnessing a battle of ideologies. The camera zoomed in on the reporter's face, catching the slight clench of his jaw. He had to take back control. "Fine," he said, sitting back, switching tactics. "If Trump is such a fighter, then why do so many people oppose him? Why does the media keep exposing his so-called lies?" Karoline smiled, slow and deliberate. "Because the truth threatens those in power, and the media, they're just another arm of that power." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. Even those who had walked in skeptical were now hanging on to every word. The reporter hesitated for half a second, a moment of uncertainty he couldn't afford. The control was slipping from his fingers, and Karoline knew it. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make the moment feel even more personal. "You came here tonight thinking you'd trap me, that you'd corner me into defending something I never said. But the truth is, you're the one stuck. Because no matter what angle you take, the people watching, they already see through it." Silence. The reporter licked his lips, forcing another fake smile. He needed to regroup, to find another way to regain control. But Karoline wasn't finished. "You wanted a soundbite. A moment to twist against me," she continued. "Here's one. The media doesn't report the truth. It reports what keeps it in power." Boom. The room was stunned. Even the live audience sat frozen, processing her words. The studio producer in the control room shifted in his seat, knowing this interview had just taken a turn he hadn't planned for. And just like that, the trap meant for Karoline had snapped shut on the reporter himself. And the real battle was just beginning. The silence in the studio stretched longer than it should have. The reporter, usually quick with a rebuttal, was momentarily speechless. His plan had been clear: corner Karoline, force her into a defensive stance, and paint her as either blind or hypocritical. But now, he was the one caught in the spotlight, and Karoline was holding the torch. He shifted in his chair, forcing another smirk. "That's quite a statement," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled. "Are you saying the entire media is corrupt? That every journalist out there is lying?" Karoline's expression didn't change. "I'm saying the media isn't about the truth anymore. It's about control. And when the truth doesn't fit the narrative, they change the narrative." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded in agreement, others whispered among themselves. The energy in the room was shifting, and everyone felt it. The reporter exhaled sharply, tapping his fingers against the desk. "So let's test that theory," he said, reaching for a stack of papers beside him. Let's talk about Trump's so-called stolen election claims. Karoline leaned back slightly, folding her arms. Go ahead. The reporter shuffled through the papers dramatically, as if preparing for his big moment. Trump and his supporters have repeatedly claimed election fraud, yet courts across the country have dismissed those cases. Are you saying those rulings were all fake? It was another trap, a way to frame Karoline as a conspiracy theorist. But she didn't take the bait. Let's be clear, she said, her voice steady. What I'm saying is that the media didn't investigate the claims, they dismissed them. There's a difference. The audience reacted immediately. A few heads turned toward the reporter, watching for his next move. So you think the courts were wrong? He pressed. Karoline smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone on the defensive. It was the smile of someone who saw the cracks forming in the foundation of her opponent's argument. I think questions should be answered, not silenced. But the media doesn't ask questions anymore, does it? It picks a side and sticks to it. The words hit hard. The reporter's smirk faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. Come on, Karoline, he scoffed. The media reports facts. That was it. That was the opening she had been waiting for. Karoline sat forward, locking eyes with him. Really? She asked. Then let's do something different tonight. Instead of me defending my position, why don't you defend yours? The reporter blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me. Tell me, Karoline continued, when was the last time your network ran a positive story about Trump? Silence. The question was so simple, so direct, that it left the reporter momentarily frozen. He cleared his throat. That's not how journalism works. Karoline tilted her head. Isn't it? If the media is truly unbiased, there should be at least one positive story, right? The audience was eating it up. Even those who had started the show skeptical were now leaning forward, waiting to see how this played out. The reporter shifted uncomfortably. We report the news as it happens. Karoline didn't break eye contact. And somehow, every single fact you report paints Trump as the villain. Funny how that works. Another ripple of murmurs filled the room. The audience wasn't just watching a debate anymore. They were witnessing something bigger. The cracks in the media's carefully constructed web were beginning to show. And Karoline was the one pulling the threads. The tension in the studio had shifted. The audience wasn't just watching an interview anymore. They were watching a battle unfold in real time. The liberal reporter, usually confident, now seemed to be choosing his words more carefully. He was losing control of the narrative, and Karoline knew it. She leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. You still haven't answered my question. The reporter forced a chuckle, shaking his head. This isn't about positive or negative coverage. It's about facts. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Facts. She reached into her own stack of papers, notes she had prepared, just in case. Let's talk about facts then. The audience hushed as she read aloud. According to media watchdog reports, over 90% of mainstream coverage on Trump was negative during his presidency. 90%. She let that number hang in the air. The reporter shifted in his chair. Well, hold on, I'm not done. Karoline continued, flipping to another page. Your network specifically ran false stories that were later retracted, like the Russian bounties hoax, the false claims about Trump tear-gassing protesters for a photo op. And let's not forget the Hunter Biden laptop cover-up. The reporter's lips pressed into a thin line. He looked uncomfortable now. Karoline set the papers down. So tell me again, does the media report facts, or does it choose which facts fit the narrative? The audience murmured. Even those who had entered the studio expecting a typical political sparring match could feel it. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was an exposure. The reporter exhaled sharply. Listen, Karoline, we're not here to argue conspiracy theories. Karoline smiled. I'm not arguing anything. I'm asking questions. You don't seem to like them. The reporter's frustration was showing now. He glanced toward the camera, as if looking for a way out. The control he once had was slipping fast. We fact-check everything before we air it, he snapped. Karoline nodded. Oh, like the Steele dossier. The audience gasped. The reporter's jaw tightened. That was reported based on intelligence sources at the time. And it was fake. Karoline interrupted, her voice calm but firm. Your network pushed it for years. You brought on experts to validate it. And when it collapsed, did you issue a full correction? No, you just moved on. The silence that followed was deafening. Karoline let the weight of her words settle before speaking again. The problem isn't that the media makes mistakes. The problem is that when the truth comes out, there are no consequences, no accountability. The audience was locked in. Some nodded in agreement, others simply stared, stunned by how completely the conversation had flipped. The reporter tried to recover. Are you saying Trump was always right? Karoline shook her head. No. I'm saying the media should stop acting like a political weapon and start acting like journalists again. The room erupted into applause. The reporter, flustered, tried to cut in. Well, that's your opinion. Karoline smiled, leading back. No, that's the truth. And in that moment, it was clear. She had won. The energy in the studio had shifted entirely. Karoline wasn't just holding her ground. She was dominating the conversation. The once confident reporter now seemed unsure, glancing at his notes as if searching for an escape. He cleared his throat. Let's get back on track. The issue here isn't media bias. The issue is Trump's rhetoric, his behavior. Don't you think that's what fuels negative coverage? Karoline tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. So, just to be clear, you're saying that the media's job is to respond to a politician's words with hostility, rather than report facts objectively. The reporter frowned. That's not what I said. Karoline nodded. No, but that's what you meant. A ripple of laughter spread through the audience. The tension in the room had taken on a new shape. What started as a hostile interrogation was now something different. The audience wasn't just watching an interview. They were watching a narrative unravel in real time. The reporter sighed, frustration creeping into his voice. Look, we hold all politicians accountable. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Really? She reached for another paper from her stack. Then explain this. Your network spent weeks pushing the idea that Trump's economy was failing. Yet when Biden's inflation numbers skyrocketed, suddenly, it was complicated and not his fault. The reporter blinked. Well, economic factors are nuanced. Karoline cut in. Oh, but they weren't nuanced when Trump was president. The audience chuckled again. The cracks in the reporter's confidence were growing. He straightened, trying to regain control. We're not here to debate economic theories, Karoline. Karoline leaned forward slightly. No, we're here to talk about media honesty. But you seem uncomfortable with that. The reporter exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Let's move on. Karoline let a small smile play on her lips. I thought you wanted accountability. The room went silent. For the first time, the Liberal host seemed at a loss for words. His usual tactics, deflection, dismissive laughter, rhetorical spins, weren't working. Karoline wasn't getting flustered, wasn't losing her temper. She was calm, prepared, and every word she spoke landed with precision. The audience could feel it. This wasn't just another political debate. This was a reckoning. And it wasn't over yet. The tension in the studio was thick. The reporter's confidence had eroded, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat. His face was tight, his grip on the desk firm. He was searching, grasping, for something to turn this interview back in his favor. Then, he found it. Leaning forward, He forced a smile. Karoline, let's be real. You've built your career defending Trump, no matter what he does. Can you honestly say he's never lied? A murmur ran through the audience. Some nodded, sensing an opening. Others leaned in, waiting for Karoline's response. She didn't flinch. Of course not, she said simply. He's human, like the rest of us. The reporter blinked. That wasn't the reaction he expected. So you admit he lies? Karoline smiled. I admit that all politicians make mistakes. But here's the real question. Do you hold them all to the same standard? The reporter hesitated. Karoline continued, her voice calm but firm. Because when Joe Biden was caught lying about inflation, Afghanistan, and even his own past, your network barely covered it. When Kamala Harris was fact-checked for misleading claims, you dismissed it as misspeaking. But when Trump says something you don't like suddenly, it's a crisis. She tilted her head. Tell me, does your definition of truth change depending on who's in office? The audience murmured again. The reporter shifted in his seat. He needed to regain control. That's a clever dodge, Karoline, but let's talk facts. Trump's election claims is legal battles. These aren't media fabrications. They're real controversies. Karoline nodded. Yes, and they should be debated. But why is it that when conservatives raise concerns, they're called conspiracy theorists? But when Democrats do the same, it's an important discussion. The audience chuckled. The reporter exhaled sharply. This isn't about bias. It's about accountability. Karoline leaned forward slightly. Then where was the accountability when media outlets pushed false Russia collusion stories for years? Or when journalists swore Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation? You demand accountability from conservatives, but where is your own? Silence. For the first time, the reporter had no response. His usual tactics, diversion, loaded questions, selective outrage, were failing. Karoline wasn't just answering his challenges. She was exposing them. The audience wasn't just watching a debate. They were watching the truth unravel. The reporter's fingers drummed against the table. He glanced at the teleprompter, searching for an out. He needed a closing remark, something strong, something that would make Karoline stumble. Then he smirked. Well, Karoline, it's easy to sit there and criticize. But tell me this, if Trump is so perfect, why is he always under investigation? The audience went still. Karoline met his gaze without hesitation. The final showdown was here. The reporter's smirk widened as he delivered his final shot. If Trump is so perfect, why is he always under investigation? A murmur rippled through the audience. Some people nodded, sensing a victory. Others sat in silence, waiting to see how Karoline would respond. But she didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Then she leaned forward, her voice calm, but razor-sharp. If being investigated proves guilt, then tell me, does that mean Joe Biden is guilty too? The smirk disappeared from the reporter's face. Karoline continued, her words cutting through the air like a knife. Because last I checked, Biden is under multiple investigations. His classified documents scandal, his family's overseas business dealings, even allegations of influence peddling. Asterisk, asterisk, she paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Or do investigations only matter when they involve Trump? Asterisk, asterisk. Silence. The reporter cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. His usual composure was slipping. That's not the same, he said quickly. Trump's investigations are far more serious. Karoline arched an eyebrow. More serious? According to who? Your network. The audience chuckled. The tension in the room had shifted. Karoline leaned back, her expression unshaken. The truth is, the media doesn't investigate corruption. It protects the people it likes and destroys the ones it doesn't. The reporter opened his mouth to argue, but Karoline wasn't finished. If justice was truly blind, the media would be covering every scandal equally. But instead, you spin narratives, bury inconvenient facts, and label anyone who questions you as a conspiracy theorist. The reporter's lips pressed together. He had no comeback. Karoline let a small smile form. You asked why Trump is always under investigation. Maybe the real question is, why do the people in power fear him so much? The room fell completely silent. The reporter swallowed hard. He glanced at his notes, at the teleprompter, at the producers behind the camera. But there was nothing left to say. Karoline had won. The audience burst into applause. Some stood, others cheered, but all of them knew they had just witnessed something rare. A moment where the truth wasn't twisted, where someone refused to be intimidated. As the cameras kept rolling, the reporter forced a tight smile and shifted in his seat. The interview wasn't ending the way he had planned. And Karoline? She simply sat back, calm, composed, and victorious. Because when faced with lies, she hadn't just defended herself. She had exposed the game itself.